Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Laura Datner. I'm a MIPA board member. I am pleased to introduce to you Tracy Meehan. Tracy leads the translational research team and the Center for Injury Research and Policy, bringing close to 30 years of experience in communications, health education, marketing, and research to her role. And Tracy is going to be talking to us today about using AI to design health communication campaigns. Take it away, Tracy.
Thank you, Laura. Um, Thank you all for coming. I know it's the afternoon after lunch, so hopefully I will be able to keep you entertained enough to and have you learn a little something along the way. So I do spend a lot of time figuring out how to make complicated things, including AI, actually make sense to people. Hopefully, by the end of this session, you'll walk away with at least one AI tool or trick that you can try right away. Just some logistics. Feel free to type questions in the chat, and I will try and keep my eye on those as we go. And we should have a couple minutes at the end as well, hopefully, so we can do that as well. Um, okay, so I do talk a lot about AI to a lot of different people. And it used to be that people were skeptical and kind of didn't see themselves using AI. And now I think a lot of people are more curious and open to at least exploring it, but they don't know where to start a lot of times. And so when I was thinking about how to put together this session, what I thought would be the best way to do it is actually to show an actual campaign that we designed and how we used AI throughout the process to give you some examples of what it looks like in real life to use it for different types of campaigns. So we are going to um, do that. But before we jump into that, there's just a couple of things I want to talk about to get us all on the same page. So, first, I'm not going to have time to talk about the basics of AI. If you aren't as familiar with AI and you want a quick intro into the basics, I strongly recommend that you take a look at this video. You guys will get the slides, but you can also scan the QR code or go to YouTube and go to CIRTC underscore. This is video that I recorded because every time I talk to people, they were asking me the same questions. So a lot of the intro stuff is on this video. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at that. It gives information about how large language models are developed, what the risks are, ethical considerations, and even some limitations of the programs, as well as some potential ideas for use. So take a look at that. I also wanted to start with kind of my philosophy about AI use. I use AI in some form every day. I was an early adopter and I have found that it can be incredibly helpful. But I also acknowledge and realize and have learned that it does have limitations and that how you think about it and use it can have a big impact on how successful that use will be. So I wanted to kind of think about this idea of human in the loop. So that is a concept that a lot of people in AI circles use. And it's this idea that you shouldn't use any AI programs or AI content shouldn't go out without having a human at least review it before it kind of goes out to the public. What I don't like about that from the public health side is it puts AI in the center and it makes the work of the AI program the focus, and humans are just checking it. And a few months ago, I heard a speaker talk about the idea of flipping this concept. So we are instead thinking of it as AI in the loop. So humans are leading the work. They're coming up with the ideas, they're interacting with other humans. The AI is just there for support and assistance in our work and how we're thinking. So I'm encouraging us to flip and think about that. We don't want AI replacing humans. We want AI helping humans. So think about using your knowledge, your experience, your interactions with the community you work with and then use AI as a tool. You're driving the work, not AI. So if you start thinking about AI in that way, I think it will really help, and it helps you get your authenticity, your expertise, your information out. If you start with AI, everything starts to sound generic. There are potential biases. It's not going to feel authentic to your audience. So just if we frame it that way, it I think can really make a difference in how our AI used and how successful it is, honestly. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is the program that you're using and what that looks like in your institution. So I use ChatGPT because it is the program that has been reviewed and accepted for use at our institution. I have the enterprise version of ChatGPT, which I'm going to show you what that means in a minute. But you can tell that that's what it is because in this red circle right here, what it says is what this is. ChatGPT can make mistakes. OpenAI doesn't use nationwide children's workspace data to train its models. So that is clear because it says the name of my institution, that I'm working with the enterprise model, and it even has, now we are lucky and we have this where we can tap into company knowledge as well. But why does that matter? First, you want to double check to make sure that if you are using any programs that you understand what your institution's policies are. If you aren't following their rules, you could be out of compliance and you could be possibly putting your organization at risk. So definitely look into that. And this is an example of the free version of ChatGPT versus the enterprise version. And we don't have to go into this in a ton of detail, but some of the things that matter, you're using a later version. Your prompts, if you're using an enterprise version, are not used to train the OpenAI models. Your institution can own the data. You have an admin console that your team can help use for management. You have more advanced protections for your institution, and there's custom enterprise pricing. If you are using a free version, you may be putting your institution at risk depending on what their risk profile is. There's lots of discussion out there about which of the generative AI programs are better. Like I said, I'm using ChatGPT because that is what our institution approves. If you have an option, there are other programs out there like Perplexity, Gemini, many others. Perplexity is one I see a lot of academics use because they have trained their models using data that they asked permission to use, which is ethically something I really support. And that's not true for OpenAI and ChatGPT. So something to think about there as well. Okay. And then just really quickly, all of this is in the intro AI video, but I can't do an AI talk without talking about it. If you're going to use AI, please do not use it to do these things. Do not share PHI in AI programs. Even if you have the enterprise version, it's just not worth the risk. So keep PHI out of AI. Do not share any confidential data, which can also include non-public data sets from national registries, proprietary or embargoed research findings, and possibly even full sections of grant applications before they have been submitted, or reviewer comments depending on funder or journal policies. All of these things I'm putting on this slide are here because I have heard concrete examples of people actually doing this, and I've had discussions with people. So please don't do that. Okay. Do not use AI to write or rewrite scientific results. Lots of funders and journals now have specific policies on AI use, and they require disclosure of use. So it's important to think about that. But also, in terms of the scientific results, I firmly believe that interpretation of scientific data really requires human judgment and context and accountability. And the AI programs can make mistakes. So it's better to write it first and ask AI for help if you need it than to have it do the work for you. Okay. Already talked about not violating publisher or funder policies. And then do not assume that all AI tools have been approved for your institution. A lot of AI tools can open your institution up for security risks. So definitely make sure you're looking at whether or not your institution approves them. This includes Chrome extensions, free online tools, and even apps. I talk about AI all the time. I've been in this space for years now, and even I fell for one. There was one, it was recommended to me. It was a Chrome extension. I was using it on my personal computer. I had colleagues who told me it was great. It had a lot of downloads. I downloaded the extension and it still infected my computer. So please make sure you're asking. Okay. In terms of responsible use of AI, I do want to talk about this for just a minute. These programs use a lot of resources. This number fluctuates, but roughly AI queries can use up to 10 times more energy than a web search. And these data centers that are required to run these programs have huge carbon footprints, from the emissions to the vast amount of waters that are needed to keep the equipment cool to even the land that they require. And we know that those environmental costs often fall the hardest on communities that already experience health and resource inquiries or inequities. I'm sorry. So something to think about, right? So again, I'm a proponent. I think they have good use, but let's be thoughtful about our use. Whenever possible, use a web search to find information, use AI to transform information. So, for example, if you just need the CDC's latest drowning statistics, you can do that with a Google search. If you want help translating those research findings into plain language, that's where AI can come in. Think about streamlining your prompts. So prompts are the questions you put into the programs to ask it to help you with information, right? When we first started, they were pretty short. Then we realized if the prompts are too short, you don't get good information. So now I've seen people create prompts that literally are like pages long. But find a compromise somewhere in the middle and find what works for you without having to use huge, because every word is a different token, costs more energy and more water and all the things. And then, if possible, if these are something that you're going to be using a lot, there are actually lower impact tools, things like running smaller large language models that are on your local platform is more efficient than the web-based versions. And you can also, even within ChatGPT, there are different models that you can use. There's a quick version and there's one that thinks a lot more and draws a lot more energy. So choose, and those are great for certain circumstances, but choose your model wisely. Okay, so we're going to go into how we use ChatGPT and large language models primarily. There's some other programs we're going to talk about a little bit. But we're going to show different ways that we used for a campaign. I wouldn't necessarily use every single one of these for every single campaign, but I wanted to show some of the options. And there are a few times where I just wanted to show you some examples we didn't actually use, but could have been helpful. Oh, use AI with intention for good, not just for output. Okay. So the examples that we're going to be talking about, we use as part of a health communications campaign that was done as part of a program called T4CIP, or Trainees for Child Injury Prevention. And that program trains medical students, residents, and fellows about child injury prevention and advocacy. And as part of that, it's a year-long program. And as part of the program, they actually do a day of action on a topic, in this case, button batteries, where they do some sort of event locally and then also participate in a social media blitz. They learn about working with community and organizational partners, as well as how to develop campaign materials. So part of my exploration that we're going to show today is to see what answers generative AI programs would give to see how helpful it would be to people who aren't familiar with the topics. I can do all this work myself because I've been in the field for decades. But for people who are new, how good would it be to help them with some of this? And I'll talk about that as we go. Okay. So where do you start when you're thinking about a health communications campaign? Many of us start with lit reviews, and I have seen a lot of students are actually using ChatGPT for lit review. I do think there are other programs out there that are better suited for this, but I just wanted to try and see what it would do because we know some of our students are using it. And I also am trying to limit the number of programs that I have to pay for. So I want to see what I can do with the programs I already have. So I asked it, you're a literature expert. My problem is I need to review key literature and authors on button batteries. Please list and describe the most influential books, articles, and papers, and then include a brief overview of each work's contribution to the field and why the authors are considered important. It did an okay job, but my impression is it's not great. I wouldn't use it for lit reviews personally. I would stick with your tried and true Google Scholar, PubMed if you don't want to pay for a research program. There are some illicit Scholarcy, Research Rabbit, Site, SCITE. I'm going to show what illicit looks like so you can see what that looks like, but I would recommend not using ChatGPT for lit reviews. All right, so I did want to show you what it would look like to use one. Illicit is one that I hear a lot of people in academia use. I also like it because they have a free version. So what I'm showing you today is based on their free version. It took about 10 minutes. You type in your question and then you give it a little more information about what kind of answers you need. You can see here fast, balanced, comprehensive. I did fast because that's the only one that's available in the free version. And it took about 10 minutes and it spit out a 12-page report that included an overall summary, a description of how the papers were screened, and what data it extracted. It had several pages of tables that had information about the study that included authors, study design, population size, study period, primary focus, things like that. And then it even goes so far as to have create a summary of the findings from each study in groups and a list of references. And I will say this actually did a pretty decent job. I know this research pretty well, so I do know that there were some key studies that were missing, but if you wanted to use it for a start, it could be an interesting start and it pulls the data in a really interesting way. So something to think about. So I'm going to keep going here. So I pulled one of the research papers and I uploaded it into ChatGPT as a PDF. And I wanted to see how it does understanding the research. So I uploaded the PDF and I said, I've attached a research paper. Please summarize the key findings. Explain it to me like I'm a non-researcher that wants to understand the important findings and why they matter. And honestly, it did a pretty good job. Again, we have several doctors in our institution that happen to be some of the leaders in this field, so I was familiar with the work, and it does a decent job with it. So it might be worth exploring. Another thing we do in the campaigns, again, remember these are doctors and doctors in training that we are working with. And so we often will provide a script that is kind of a role model for them to show them how they could talk to a patient about the topics. So I asked it to do that for me. And I asked it to base it on the paper that I had just uploaded. And again, it actually does a really good job for an initial draft. We hardly ever, or probably never, actually use something that comes from ChatGPT exactly as it puts it out. We think of it more like getting a first draft. But if you think of it that way, it doesn't. It did a really nice job of getting us started. Then you just take it from there and personalize with your voice, your experience, your knowledge of the content and things like that. But it's a great way to get you started. After I did that, without me even asking, ChatGPT asked me, would you like this in a printable handout version or adapted into a short video or training for healthcare staff? And I was like, Wow, I didn't even know that I wanted that. But yeah, sure. Let's do that. So I asked it to create a short video for a script for me, and it did that. And then it asked me if I would like a storyboard. So it created a storyboard with some potential visuals and dialogue in there. And then it even asked me if I would like it in a PowerPoint. So I said, sure. And it put together a PowerPoint. Now, it's just, text on a screen. There's no design, no visuals or anything like that, but it could be a great place, maybe even to start for presentations, right? So interesting that it just did all of these things and it asks me and it has recommendations for what you want to do next. Another thing that our trainees sometimes will do is write letters to manufacturers and policymakers asking for product design changes. So I asked it to write a letter to a button battery manufacturer with recommendations on changes they can make to help make their product safer for children. And I asked it to base the recommendations on the finding from the research paper and any other relevant data it could find from an internet search. And it actually did a pretty decent job. Again, it even formats it and gives me place for the address and manufacturer name and content and all of that kind of stuff. So great first level. Again, you want to customize a little bit, but it actually did a really nice job. And then it even went on to ask me if I wanted to customize the letter for a specific manufacturer or create a version that could be used by a public health coalition or advocacy campaign. So it even encourages you and asks you. Another thing we used it for was doctor written after visit summary instructions. So one of the things we want to do in this program is teach our medical students, residents, and fellows how to do this work on their own. So we actually want them to create some of the materials on their own so they can learn what goes into it and how to write for patients and parents. So the example that you're seeing here is the example that was provided to us by a set of students, and it was great, but it was very technical and it needed some work to be able to be understandable to patients. So I put their version into ChatGPT and asked it to suggest some revisions, and it created another version. And we don't have to go into detail, but what I'm going to show you why this matters is I wanted to compare and see how it did. And so I ran Flesch Kincaid scores built into Word. I know those aren't the best always, but I wanted a quick way for some comparison. And their version, you can see, has a grade level of 12th grade basically, and a Flesch reading ease level of 33.5. And for the reading ease level, the higher the number, the better. So this is kind of a low number. In the version that was created by ChatGPT, it dropped it to a 6th grade reading level and upped the reading ease to 69.2. So actually did a decent job. Now, if you are a health literacy specialist, you will be able to do this better. But for a group of medical students, residents, and fellows, it's a nice teaching tool to be able to show them this is what it can look like when you make some changes that would make it easier to understand for our patients. Okay. Another thing that we do as part of this program, but that many of us do in our spaces, is we have presentations that we give on our topics. So again, we see a lot of not great presentations from our trainees, and I wanted to see what kind of programs would be available potentially for our students to make the presentations look a little better. So I started with something that many of us have, which is PowerPoint, and many people will use that. And I actually used the text that I had ChatGPT create for a presentation. And for this one, like I said, I just used, if you go into the design tab on PowerPoint and then go over to the far right, there's the little designer, or sometimes it will say design suggestions, depending on what version you're using. And I uploaded the slides, those black and white slides that look like this, that's what these slides are here. It is different versions of that. And all of these I just picked, you can go through and pick different templates that it suggests. And these are this same content from below shown in different templates. Is it perfect? Maybe not. It doesn't include photos. It has a limited design option, but you can see it's presented the information in some cases in a lot nicer display than just the black and white text. And it could be a great way to get started, especially with a free program we already have. Another program that many people use for presentations is Canva. So I wanted to test that. A lot of our students are using this now. I had a little trouble pulling the ChatGPT slides into Canvas to test the template. So I actually had to use what is called a text to presentation prompt. But you basically do the same thing and say, I'm going to create a presentation on button batteries. Here's my audience. Create it. And this is what it came up with. Not great. I'm going to show the one on the right. I just want to flip through the slides really quickly so you can see what it actually looks like. So you can see it's got these like kind of weird designs. Not at all like the content that it leaked together or leaked that it put together was I wouldn't chunk it in quite this way. Uh Interesting pictures of children crying. This content is actually none of this is actually accurate. I don't know where these numbers are coming from, so got to be careful about that. This chart, I don't know what those numbers are. It says the bar chart illustrates key actions. Nope, doesn't do that. So this is not great. I probably would not use Canva. And also, if you design any of your presentations with accessibility in mind by doing things like alt text and reading order, it's horrible with that. So probably wouldn't recommend it. You can get it for template ideas, but I wouldn't do it from scratch. Another program that a lot of our trainees were starting to use is called Plus AI. They do have a free trial, but it's only for 7 days and you do have to pay for it. So this would be an investment. With this platform, you actually have to install an add-on to your PowerPoint, which may be a problem for some. I can't do that on my work computer, so I had to test it on my personal computer. I didn't think the slides looked great in here. They're small text, kind of crowded. You can pick different slide templates before it generates the slides, and even go in on individual slides, but didn't love it. The first draft didn't have any pictures at all. I had to go back in there. Doesn't match my personal style. You have less control over some things. You don't get to choose where it pulls the photo from. And I saw a couple cases where it was actually potentially using photos that were copyrighted that could put your institution at risk. So this, again, not my favorite, but I wanted to show it because a lot of people are using it. I'm going to go through another version of this so you can see what it looks like. But one thing I want to show is those little yellow boxes you'll see when I do that. It does actually give tips in those yellow boxes of how you can make that slide better. So I did like that. This one also has trouble with accessibility. So I wouldn't, yeah, I just be aware of that. This in this version that I'm going to show you, I also did their text to presentation option because I wanted to see how it compared to ChatGPT. I think in terms of the content, it actually did a decent job overall, but I think I like ChatGPT's a little bit better. But kind of here's what this presentation looks like. So nice that it has some extra pictures in there, gives those tips. It actually created some AI generated images. This one's kind of weird. I don't think that's the kind of battery we were talking about. So, there's some different things, but it again chunks the information in different ways and has some interesting ways of displaying it. So, could be interesting. I like this one. It came up with its own quiz on button battery safety, so thought that was interesting. All right, last one I want to show was Gamma. I didn't think I would like this. It's another one that a lot of students are using, but I honestly was actually kind of impressed with this one. They have a free version. It's more limited than the pay versions, but it didn't require a credit card to open, which I really liked, and you can use it from their website, which means I could use it on my work computer. Um, so, so all of those were great. I think the slides are nicely laid out. You can choose from a variety of formats. You can choose how the images are pulled in, so you can tell it not to use images that are copyrighted, which is really important. And then you can also present straight from Gamma, Or you can download them into a PowerPoint file, which I would recommend doing because then you can change the accessibility errors that it comes with, which it's the same as others. So again, here's kind of some of the slides. You can see what they look like. Some nice displays, some nice images. So some different options there that I thought I'd share. Okay, so getting back to some other ways that we use this. One of the things we do with T4CIP to train our participants is we want them to think about community education and advocacy and who potential partners might be. And so early on, we brainstorm with them what that might look like. And I wanted to see what ChatGPT would do to help us come up with a table of potential partners. I even asked it to give me suggested activities for those partners and what the key messages for those partners would be. And it actually did a decent job of that. And I think it might be interesting for our trainees to start to use some of these. Again, you would need to personalize the list. And, you could come up with this on your own. But almost every time I've done this, there has been at least one thing that I thought, oh, I didn't think about that. Or, oh, I could have, maybe we can think about that group in a different way. So it's worth doing, I think. The other nice thing is I copied and pasted this table just straight from ChatGPT. So I can also see this potentially being useful for grant applications. Okay, we also make sure that we help people understand existing health disparities or how they're perceived. So I asked about it. It's not as big of an issue with button batteries, but every time I have done this, it has come up with some really interesting things to think about when you're brainstorming or planning. I will always caution they are not going to be all inclusive, and we know these programs have biases in them. So it is possible and likely that there will be biases and stereotypes, but if you're aware of that, you can pay attention. All right. We also, now that we've done some of the lit review and background and thinking about health disparities, one thing that you can do is build a parent persona. It is always, always, always better to directly talk to your audience that you will be working with, but in some cases that is not possible. The other way you can use this, though, is to upload your information from your audience that you know and ask it to build a persona based on that. The personas are nice because it helps you when you're thinking about your message creation. It can help you think through what that might look like. So it gave me information about demographics from a person. It told me, by the way, that it used my research articles as well as data from poison control centers and broader child injury prevention literature to come up with this. It gave me some goals, challenges, tech info, and even emotional drivers. And honestly, a lot of this aligns fairly closely with what we actually know with families and what they know. And then it even gave me information on what messaging would work for this parent persona. So can be an interesting exercise. We did specifically then ask it what parents know about button batteries and where the gaps are. In our messaging, we like to address the gaps. And this actually did a really decent job. Again, you have to bring your expertise in, but it's a good starting point. I will caution that it is good for topics where the information is already known and out there in the world. It will not work so well for new topics where there's not a lot of information it can pull from. And then for these campaigns, we have a suite of materials that we create that can be shared on social media. So I wanted to see what it would do with that. And I told it what my goals were and asked it to help me start thinking what that would look like. And it gave me what it would recommend each of the 7 graphics would focus on. And then it even gave me a breakdown of what a visual could be and what the text would be and what the call to action would be. And even, some more text that could be used for social media posts, things like that. Again, it was actually a pretty good start. Another thing we do with these campaigns are social media campaigns. So we have to have a way to track them and see our success. Hashtags have traditionally been a way to do that. They're becoming less useful as all of the platforms are changing their algorithms, but for now, still somewhat useful. Sometimes we struggle with coming up with unique hashtags. And so we've tested it. This one, it didn't have great ones. We didn't love these, but there were some different ideas for sure. I would caution you and any students that you work with to make sure they really think through all of them. If you can see number 14 and number 20, I'm not going to read them out loud, but I would probably get fired if I use those. So just be thoughtful about the hashtags that you are using. Okay. Another thing that we run into, we know images are vital to any of our campaigns, and with many injury prevention topics, we often have trouble finding images that actually show the correct behavior and the correct image. So I wanted to see what it would do with that. So I asked it to give me some ideas of what safe storage would look like. And it gave a bunch of different options, which were good. The first one was locked medicine cabinet, which is what we recommend for sure. So I wanted to see what it would do with that to help me come up with an image. So it came up with this image, which actually wasn't too bad, but it doesn't have any button batteries in it. So I want to show button batteries being stored in there. And that's where we ran into trouble. I asked it to do that, and it came up with this weird, I don't know what that is, but that's not how button batteries are packaged, this little like circle-y thing here. So I kept trying to get it to do more. Now it put them on the outside in some weird way. And when I asked it to put them inside, it gave me this weird, I don't know what that is, voting box. I don't know what that is. So it wasn't working. And at this point, being aware of the environmental impact, I said, it's not working. I'm not going to keep going. We need to stop here. Let's do something else. So then I moved over to Canva. And Canva actually also has these image creation AI programs in there. And it actually did a better job. We had to work a little bit to get the language right. When we said button batteries, it was confused and it didn't quite know what we were talking about. But once we switched over to the term coin lithium batteries, it started to do a better job. And it was getting there. By the end, we actually had a closer, more realistic image, but it just wasn't exactly what we were looking for. So we again ended up going another route. I ended up taking went old school, took an actual photo of a lockbox I had at home and imported that and used those. But it was interesting exploration. And then keep going with the graphic design. We had an image that we wanted to create, and we were having trouble coming up with like a attention grabbing headline. So that wasn't too public healthy. So we asked ChatGPT, and we didn't use any of these exactly as they came out, but we ended up combining a couple of them and used a variation for what we ended up with. So we ended up doing that with this one. We already had some content, but we wanted to see what it would do for this particular graphic. So I asked it to give me some information. It asked me for a visual layout. It gave me this information. Here's what ChatGPT recommended. We modified it based on what we knew. We sent it to one of our experts who reviewed it and made some additional changes. Then we sent it to our graphic designer, and this is what she came up with. And if you really compare the two, you can see we didn't use ChatGPT information exactly, but a lot of it is pretty similar. And it was actually a really good place for us to start. So could be, again, interesting exploration. Okay, I wanted to talk for a second about alt text. We really believe on our team that everyone should be able to access our information. So we make sure in all of our graphics and visuals that we put out into the world that we include alt text. And that is the text that shows up on an image if your image can't be seen for some reason, either because of visually you can't see it, or because you're in a low Wi-Fi area and your computer can't access it, or you're at a hospital like me and it blocks images. The alt text is what comes up so that people still get the message. And so we uploaded one of our graphics that we used and asked it to write alt text, and it actually did a really nice job. So again, you can use that to help increase your accessibility. If you don't know about accessibility, which I have heard from a lot of people as well, you can actually ask it about best practices for alt text, and it will give you several pages of content. And it, again, is a good start. And if that isn't enough and you really want to go more in depth, you can actually ask it to create a plan to teach yourself about accessibility, and it will design steps and different modules and give you places to go for different information. That, again, is a really great start. Okay. Flyers is another thing that we do a lot. And so I wanted to see what would happen. I asked ChatGPT to create a flyer with information for parents. It created one, but it was all text and it had lots of emojis, but it didn't have any designer images. The one on the right here, I will say it did offer to translate the text into Spanish. It did it in less than a minute. We decided not to use this version, so I did not get it reviewed by a translator for accuracy, but we have seen with Spanish, it does a decent job. It is never 100% accurate, and especially for medical information, you absolutely want to get it reviewed by a medical translator, but it can be a start, and you also need to make sure you're getting the nuances in the language in your area, because Spanish is not the same everywhere you go, right? But again, worth looking into if you're needing it for more, Spanish, there's a lot of information out that it can pull from. If you're looking for something like Somalian or Haitian, it does not do as well. So just being aware of that. I did then go to Canva and the Canva Magic Studio AI to ask it to design a flyer for me using the text that ChatGPT created. And I'm going to show you some close-ups of what that looked like. I really kind of want to use this image here with this lockbox. I don't know what that is. Basically, some of them are pretty funny. None of the images could be used, but you could actually use maybe some of the templates. So something to think about there. Talked about images. Again, I just wanted to have a side note here. These were not for the button battery campaigns, but we have struggled to find images on stock photo sites, and it's really difficult to find the images that show correct behavior. So we've been playing with it to do things like a child in a high chair in a lower income high-rise apartment, or accurate car seat photos, or even diversity. I joke all the time that I'm going to write a paper someday that says, do only white men mow the lawn, because if you go to stock photo sites, that's all that you see images of, right? But you can use them for some different things. We have also used it for, these are some examples that we actually use to create with fireplace gates and water beads. These are both actual things that we use in campaigns. You can use them for video and audio. There is a program called Vyond. You see on the top left, VYOND, and it can create videos. I'm not going to play it, but it can create videos for you. It can translate them in up to 70 different languages. So there's all kinds of options that are actually pretty cool. I do have a video, but we're coming on time here, so I'm going to kind of skip this, but you can see really quickly, you can just see what it kind of looks like, this program. And it created all of this from a 3 to 4 sentence prompt.
Hey parents. Today, let's talk about...
Okay. So it actually has some good content. I would encourage you to look at Vyond. If you do videos, you do need a designer to work with you, though it takes a little bit of skill to do some of these. Canva is another thing you can go if you have less skill on your team for some of these things. This video was created, you pick 4 or 5 pictures, and it turned it into a video in 5 minutes, and we edited it in 15 minutes and used it for a campaign. All right, I talked too much, so I'm running out of time. We used it to give us suggestions for webinar panelists, and it was really good. We asked it for webinar questions, and we used many of these questions. Here's some of the graphics that we created in case you're interested and you want to see more about what our day looked like in action. You can search for button battery safety or look at the Day of Action materials on t4cip.org. And just want to end with, as you build your campaigns, remember, AI is not the strategist. You are. It can speed up your work. spark ideas, help you communicate more clearly, but from the heart of public health, empathy, judgment, lived experience, all of that comes from you. So think of AI as your intern or co-pilot. You do the main work, have it help you. Ending with a cute case. This is Laura's niece who drew an image, and her dad used ChatGPT to turn it into this really cool image. So if you like this and you want to learn more, we have lots of information on AI at cirtc.org. We have videos that show a lot of how we use AI and our new podcast communications breakdown. You can find out wherever you get your podcast talks about AI a lot, and reach out to me if you have questions. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you, Tracy. I believe it is time for break, but maybe we'll hang around for a couple minutes. If anyone has questions, they can put them in the chat.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. And reach out to me if you have questions that I didn't have time to get to. Thank you for all the nice comments, everyone. All right, Laura, it looks like we don't have any more comments, so I think we can go ahead and end the session.